Okay, so a while back, somewhere in the warren of good vibes that is the Quinn's Quest Patreon community, some cool person left a comment like, "Hey Daddy Cat, all these tips on how to be a hip GM are real fly, but what about some tips on how to be a better player? Peace out." Like I said, they were very cool. So yeah, what advice do me and my emotional support archive of character sheets have for how to be a better player? I think it's just like how we often forget that the GM is a player too, and for the game to function, the GM has to be having fun. Why don't we think that the players should also take on some of the anxiety-soaked burden of making sure the game sings? At their simplest, RPGs are just conversations after all. And just like Mama Quinns used to say, a good conversation is a team effort. All the same, I don't want to burden my players with all these do's and don'ts. I think it's a privilege that they just show up at my house every week. So if I am going to give new players advice, I want to keep it really simple, really short. And actually this came up in my home games recently because I've been onboarding some new players with very little RPG experience. And so I was thinking to myself, what little thing do I want to tell them that could have the biggest impact on the game? And I think the single biggest and best piece of advice anyone can give to a new player is this: be a fan of the other player characters in your party. If you've seen this remark, it's most likely because it's commonly trotted out as a key piece of advice for GMs, which it is as well. And I'm also going to talk about it in that context in this video. And I'll start by saying this: GMs, if you're not doing this, get it together. Disclaimer, I was not doing this for most of my life as a GM, but now I do, and my life is better. But the thing is, the reason this remark is so good is also the reason it's not really one piece of advice. This is just like a simple phrase, like a lodestar for you to follow, and the more you think about it, the more you'll be able to pull yard after yard of good advice and best practices from it. But I'm getting distracted. Like I say, let's start by talking about what this tip means for game masters. So when I started as a GM, as I think is probably quite natural, when I thought about stories that I would have to create, I reached for touchstones of stories that I loved. Stuff from TV, movies, anime, or even video games. But a TTRPG is kind of a different, unique beast from all of those things. The key thing about a TTRPG is 100% of your audience are super fans of the protagonist of the story. Something that isn't even true in video games. Let me reiterate that. Every single person you are trying to impress with your story cares more about the protagonist than whatever story you are telling, because those protagonists are people that they created, that they are fully doing their best to inhabit. So if, during your prep and during the blue sky thinking of, what story might I tell, if you're not thinking about what kind of story would be best for these characters, you're being a big bozo. Once again, let me state, I was that bozo for quite literally decades. I designed adventures that I thought were cool, and then my players put their characters into my story, and it never quite fit. My story wouldn't quite be right for their characters wouldn't quite be right for my story. The result is constant, very subtle friction that makes the game worse for everybody around the table, including you, the GM. I read or heard something a while back that I've been thinking about, which is that the true service that a GM provides for the players who are showing up every week isn't putting a story in front of them as if you've cooked them a big meal. Really, secretly, the service a GM provides is that you will learn their original characters better than anybody, sometimes even better than themselves. In the days between sessions, as you walk to the supermarket, you'll be thinking about their character. As you're in the shower, you'll be thinking about their character. Not in that way, get your mind out of the gutter, unless you want your mind to be in the gutter, in which case, you do you, my friend. I sort of now want to do a Quinn's Quest blog post encouraging the GMs in my community to think about which of their player characters they were most attracted to, but that's just because this is a Saturday and I'm feeling carefree. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. I think I've just said a lot of woolly abstract stuff, so let me give you a concrete example of what creating a story for player characters looks like, as opposed to creating your own story. And this is going to relate to something that's kind of a running joke among the video game designers I know who work as narrative designers, the sort of storytellers and writers of video games, because there's a joke in that community that all storytelling tips eventually come back to professional wrestling. Because you can look at professional wrestling and see it as simple, but a lot of smart people I know don't look at it and see it as simple. They see it as a raw refinement of how to get people really hype with very, very simple stories. And for TTRPG GMs, when I tell you to be a fan of your characters, a great way to do that is to, when you're designing your stories, don't think of yourself as writing a novel. Think of yourself as the showrunner for a professional wrestling show. The players are your wrestlers, and you have to think, how am I going to sell t-shirts of these people? How am I going to get the audience hype for these people? How am I going to take out the kernel at the heart of all of these characters, whether it's a hero or a villain, funny or serious, and take that kernel and grow it and grow it and grow it until it fills an arena. To plan your big show, you wouldn't start by going, okay, I'm going to create a character and she's a witch, and no, stop it! You'd think, okay, which of my cast hasn't popped yet, hasn't had a cool moment? Okay, it's this person. What's their thing? Well, they used to be evil, but they're trying to be good. Okay, let's give them a temptation that makes them lured back to the evil side. But what could be that temptation? Oh, this character has an evil brother. Let's bring that brother in. So it's a cool moment for that character as well. And then it creates a relationship between those two wrestlers. But if you're not a fan of wrestling, and I'm completely losing you with this analogy, here's how Stonetop puts it. Stonetop is an as-yet unfinished RPG that I'm reading at the minute, and it has maybe the best sections on GM advice that I've ever read in an RPG, but here's what it has to say about being a fan of your players. The PCs are the protagonists of the story. Root for them, celebrate their victories, and lament their losses with them. Let yourself wonder things about them, and then find ways to get the answer through play. Care about them, be their fan. Being a fan doesn't mean they get what they want. You're the author of their adversity. You need to punctuate their lives with adventure. Threaten them, hurt them, but go after the things they care about and give them choices they will find difficult. Well, here's another third way to express the wisdom contained in this tip. As a GM, what you want more than anything is for players who are going to show up and care about the story as much as you do, right? But have you ever thought about the flip side of that? Think of it like this. What players want is to show up and have a table of other people who will care about their character as much as they do. And incidentally, GMs, when you're doing session 0 and your players are being encouraged to, add ideas into what do they think is cool about the world you're about to enter into, what bit of world building do they want to do, that can go the other way as well. If you as a GM know that a game is going to hinge on you caring about the player characters, feel free to stick your oar in as they're designing their characters, because I know a game's going to be better for everybody if I'm not faking my fandom of your character. I really want to be a fan of your character. Like, nothing is worse as a GM than 4 players who show up all having designed their character independently with no input from each other or from you, the GM. Awful, terrible, that's the worst, it doesn't fit. It makes you, the GM, feel like you're the woe-begotten manager of a band who are just misbehaving and awkward. Stop taking those drugs, stop peeing on that TV. So, that's roughly what this tip means for GMs. Now, I want to spend the rest of this video talking about how this tip doesn't only apply to GMs. And if you really want your RPGs to sing, if you really want everybody to go home, the GMs and players, thinking oh, that session was so good, I think the most important thing is for players to also be fans of one another. Or one another's characters. I'm sure hopefully your players are fans of each other in real life. To explain the power of this tip, let's think about it from the perspective of a player on the receiving end first, right? I just talked about how good it feels as a player when your GM is fascinated by your character and creating stories and plot arcs for your character. Imagine, if you dare, the unbridled luxury of being a player at a table with your character sheet and your pencil, and you know the GM is building a story to make your character pop, but then also all the other players at the table are also really interested in your character and asking questions about them and loving it when they do cool stuff, and whenever bad stuff happens to them, they're shocked. What I'm here to tell you is that if every player is a fan of every other player's character, you all get to experience that heavenly state of affairs all the time, every week. So how do we get there? How do we make players who are ordinarily pretty self-centered fans of one another? What are some best practices we can encourage players to do, or that we can do as players? Well, as with so many good things in RPGs, it can all start in session 0. Let's imagine that we've got a 4-player game, we've got 4 playable characters, right? In session 0, as you might have been doing, everyone is creating their own character and getting excited about that and being like, oh, I want to be angry. It's oh, I was thinking about being angry. It's oh, okay, maybe you could be the angry one. There's something much more important you can be doing and more exciting. Because think of it like this. You're not just creating your character, which, runs the risk of being two-dimensional. It's hard to create someone interesting in a vacuum. You have the opportunity in session 0 to create one character in a 4-player game and 3 different relationships that your character has with each one. And in doing this, your character will be this glittering 3-dimensional thing like a diamond that catches the light whenever you look at a new side of them. Like, let's go to the super basics of RPGs and imagine that I have made Stormcloak the Ranger, a crack shot with a bow with a pet direwolf. I haven't made a character there, I have made a trope. And if I want to explain to other players why I'm more than a trope, it'll take the form of me monologuing and them thinking, oh, okay. The way we can instantly improve Stormcloak is by being a fan of the other player characters and thinking, okay, what is Stormcloak's relationship with each of the 3 of you? Let's say we've got a dwarf in the party and I go, okay, you know, it'd be really fun if you were really good or really bad with animals. And so my wolf either weirdly loved you or hated you, and that will give us the opportunity to show how like ferocious or friendly my wolf is, and now my wolf is a more complicated character. And I can be a character because I can feel really complicated about my wolf being friends with you or hating you. Or if the wolf hates you, I could be like, that's your fault, when maybe it's not. Who else we got in the party? We got an elf wizard. Maybe we used to be lovers, or we are lovers, or we're siblings. And suddenly you're gonna see a very different side of Stormcloak. And like maybe we've got a human in the party, right? And that human just wants to be friendly and nice. Then I can say to that human, all right, listen, I want Stormcloak to be kind of a loner, but in order to show that, I need someone to try and make friends with me. So how do you feel about like you thinking I'm cool and you trying to make friends with me, and then I can show how likable your character is as you slowly wear down my walls, and eventually I start liking you. Or maybe that won't happen in our story. We'll just play to find out. And I've given you the most self-serving version of that, but it's fine if this practice starts out as self-serving, because what you'll find as you become as invested in your character's relationships with other players as you are in your character by themselves, you will naturally become a fan of everybody. If your dwarf is constantly doing scenes with my cool wolf that make my wolf look cooler, I'm gonna think your dwarf is cooler. And like that, we're off to the races. So that's just a fun thing to do in session 0 that takes your party of players and, for want of a better word, gets this party started. As we start rolling into session 1, though, you're going to start feeling the benefits of this immediately, because a half-decent GM will usually do scenes as you go from week to week that center or put the spotlight on one character or another. If you care about that character, watching scenes that involve your character in a more minor role are going to be more fun, even if you're just thinking to yourself, okay, this dwarf is really going through it right now. How does that change my relationship to him? But also, in the more long term, you know how a table of players will be, if presented with a mystery, more able to solve it if they all put their heads together, you know? If there's a little subtle thing that the GM puts in, probably 1 out of 4 players will notice it and everyone will be like, oh, great job. If players all know each other's characters, they can do the same thing with noticing cool roleplay moments. If everybody around the table knows and is a fan of Stormcloak the Ranger, when something happens, there's an opportunity for Stormcloak to do something cool, the other players will tell me. Hang on, wasn't that NPC a bit of a dick to you last time you met him? I think you should be a dick back. Don't forget it's raining Stormcloak. You hate the rain. I bet you're in a really bad mood. Oh my god, you have really long hair, don't you, right? You could make the thread we need out of your hair. Or perhaps I'm overcomplicating this, because really the best role-playing doesn't take the form of players remembering past details about your character. It takes the form of being interested in stuff that hasn't been established yet. And this is one of the great things about RPGs, because let's say you're a fan of a comic book or something, right? You're just left to endlessly speculate on Reddit about how a character feels about certain things. At a table of RPG players, you can ask each other. What a privilege. Hey, Stormcloak has such a stick up his ass sometimes. Should we get him drunk and see what happens? Hey, Stormcloak, what's your type? I'm not interested in you, but I am curious who you're interested in. Hey, Stormcloak, if I start feeding your wolf without your permission, what are you going to do to me? And hey, if that sounds like something you would love to happen at your table, but you think your players might need just a bit of a nudge to do it, have I got a thing to sell you? I made it sound like I made this. I definitely didn't. James D'Amato, ex-host of the One Shot podcast, has a product out called the Ultimate RPG Campfire Deck that's just full of questions, good questions. And the way it's designed is that whenever your party of adventurers camp for the night, everyone can like draw a question and ask that of another character. And I think on Quinn's Quest, I'm at risk of assuming that people's home groups of players are just as confident as my home groups are, as if I didn't have to spend literally years building up my confidence and the confidence of my players to get to the point where we don't need a product like this. That said, I should probably use this thing more in my home games. The questions in it are really good, but more than that, they break you out of your rut. Like, I could come up with good questions, but they wouldn't be the same kind of good questions that are in this deck. In making this video, I've actually inspired myself. I really think I'm going to use this in the next Stone Top game that I'm about to run. Oh, you know, and before we wrap up this video, one final thing that players can do to be fans of each other. Remember a while back I did a video on how you should roll dice in your games, because dice are the bones of an RPG. Dice rolls are often the most exciting part, and I want to talk about how to make it better. Sometimes being a fan of another player just is when they crit or when they hit on a roll, you scream and cheer, and when they fail, you go, "Ah!" because that's going to take the emotion they were already feeling and make it that much bigger. There is a reason, if you listen to great actual plays like Worlds Beyond Number, the players are all screaming and shouting for each other, just gets everybody amped up. Thanks for watching, everybody. And hey, if you've got a tip for GMs as to how to better be fans of their players, or for players, more importantly, to be fans of each other, please leave it in a comment. Or just a success story of using techniques like this at your table. I love comments on these private Patreon videos because they don't get that many views, but that's cool. If we have comments, it's like a secret little club. Goodbye, everybody. And I'll see you, why did I try and do that, during the next review?